What's good, y'all? Anderson Emerald here to talk about the women's 100 meters at the Los Angeles 2028 Olympic Games. Now, the schedule has been put out for the LA 2028 Olympics as it relates to track and field, and the women's 100 meters obviously has brought about a little controversy because of the new schedule and how it's actually going to be contested. So I'm going to dive into that. We'll take a look at the actual schedule, see how it's changed over, the past couple of decades, centuries in a sense, and how it might affect athletes who, of course, will be watching in the women's 100 meters. I'll probably do another video on like the whole schedule and like some of the interesting things, but this is the women's 100 meters first. Now, first off, the Olympic schedule was announced by World Athletics, and they dive into everything, and they're kind of highlighting this as the women's 100 meters will kickstart the LA 2028 Olympic Games. And what's interesting is that the track and field will cover the entire Olympic Games. So it's actually going to span over the course of like 13 days. But here in the article from World Athletics, it says, the athletics competition will begin with a bang on Saturday, the 15th of July, 2028, as the women's 100 meters takes center stage on the very first day of Olympic action. Here's the important quote. All three rounds, including the final, will take place that day, ensuring the games opens with one of the most electrifying events in sport. And it continues, men's 10,000, women's shot put will feature in the opening session, followed by the men's 100 meter final on day 2. We'll talk about that in a second. So again, I'm not going to talk about like the actual full schedule. I'll do that in a separate video. But as I say, athletics will be contested across 13 days between July 15th to 30th, 2028. So literally the entire, almost, I guess it's essentially the entire Olympic schedule. Now, what is the problem here? Why is it that this is going to be an issue? As I said, or as they said at the top, all three rounds, including the final, will take place that day. Let's look at this Olympic schedule. So LA 2028, they've put out the schedule for all events, all sports that will be occurring and all events that will be occurring. So let's go down and find athletics, as of course this is track and field, and this is what we're interested in here. And we have the schedule for all the different events here. So day 1 is when things are going to be kicking off. And as you can see, literally you have the morning session and the evening session, July 15th, 2028. In the morning session, you have the women's 100 meter preliminary rounds. So this is not the heats, but this is the preliminary rounds where smaller nations who aren't able to field large teams, and maybe they have 1 or 2 athletes who maybe don't get an Olympic qualifying standard, they're able to compete in the preliminary rounds that they have at the Olympics. Again, I'm going to talk about the history in one moment. Now, after that, just looking at the women's 100, you're going to see the women's 100 meter round 1. So this is where all your top athletes, Sha'carri Richardson, Julian Alfred, Sharika Jackson, Tina and Tia Clayton, Melissa Jefferson-Wooden, like all of them are going to be opening up in the 100 meters at the 2028 Olympic Games. Dean Ashley-Smith, of course, as well. So this is day 1. This is Saturday, July 15th. This is the morning session. The evening session is where you're going to have the semifinals for the women's 100. So same day, but just in the evening. And then also very similar schedule, like 90 minutes later, you'll have the women's 100 meter final. All right. So all on one day. This is completely different than anything they have done before. We have never seen all rounds of any event. Obviously the 100 is the shortest event, specifically on the track. We've never seen all rounds of the 100 meters contested on one single day, even if it's split between the morning session and evening session, right? The other thing to note is that the men do not have this same schedule. The men will have their preliminary rounds in the morning session, day 1. They'll have their opening rounds on the morning session of day 1. So this is where Kashane, Oblique, Noah, Kenny, like all those guys will open up, after the smaller nations open with preliminary rounds. But then after their 100 meter heats, the men don't have to compete again until day 2, July 16th, where on the evening session, they'll have their semifinals and their final. So again, women, they compete on one single day, all rounds, 100 meter round 1, 100 meter semifinals, and 100 meter final, all on July 15th, morning and evening session. And then the men, they have their 100 meter round 1 morning session of July 15th. And then the evening session of July 16th is when they have their semifinals and then the final. All right. So as I said, this has never happened before. Let me give a little bit of context and some history as to what the schedule has looked like in the past. So 2028 is going to be 100 years since women first competed at the Olympic Games. 1928 is when the women first competed at the Olympics, and in the 100 meters, you had 3 rounds. You had the heats, you had the semis, and you had the final. The heats were contested on the first day. The semis and the final were contested on the second day. So very similar structure to what we know as, today, the schedule that we know today. There was no preliminary rounds for small countries. That doesn't come into existence until, I think, 2012. But from 1928 all the way until 1952, 1952 is the first Olympic Games where they add another round for the women specifically. So now you have the heats and the quarterfinals contested on day 1, and then you have the semifinals and the finals contested on day 2. This remains the schedule for, another couple decades. The men had already been doing this, but, back in the day, people were, they unfortunately didn't look fondly on women and felt like they couldn't do things in XYZ. So they didn't give women not only certain events, but they didn't give them equal amount of rounds. So the men had been doing heats, quarterfinals, semis, and finals for literally decades. The women, they were doing heats, semis, and finals starting 1928. Then 1952, heats, quarterfinals, semifinals, and final. Now, this is the schedule all the way up until 2012. So your athletes like Awami Tyus from 1964 and 1968, Gail Devers in 1992 and 1996, Merlene Ottey or Flojo, Evelyn Ashford, even Veronica Campbell-Brown and, Shelly Ann Fraser-Price, all of them all through 2008 were competing in 4 rounds of the 100 meters, heats, quarterfinals, semifinals, finals. 2012 is where things change. They removed the quarterfinals for every single event. And they did this for all events, 100, 200, 400, all events. I think, no, they didn't do 400 hurdles, but all those events had 4 rounds. 2012, they removed quarterfinals altogether for every single, all the events. And now it's only heats, semis, and final. That is the schedule where it has the heats on day 1, the semis, and the final on day 2. That's how it's always been. Most of y'all, that's probably what you've known for most of at least recent history. Again, many of y'all probably don't remember that there was 4 rounds of the 100 meters for, the 100, the 200, the 400. Like, it existed at the Olympics and the World Champs. So now, specifically for the women's 100, we're now shifting to a schedule where you're going to see heats, semis, and final all on the same day. That has never occurred. Never occurred. Even back when they had 4 rounds, only 2 rounds were contested on one day, right? Heats, quarterfinals, then semis and finals. So this is an interesting change of events for track and field, for the 100 meters. And I think the outroar is coming around the question on, will this be a problem? Is this actually going to be an issue for athletes? So on the surface, this is obviously not ideal. This, I don't think, is a great move for track and field, for world athletics. Obviously, they want to highlight women's athletics, so they want to put the 100-meter final on the first day to be able to open up, with women's track and field, with the fastest women in the world, all that stuff. But I think in terms of athletes being able to execute to the best of their ability, this probably isn't the most ideal situation. Athletes need and want, of course, the time to be able to warm up, to race, and then to cool down and prepare for their subsequent rounds. Now, between the semis and the final, even though that's the same day, that has been more ideal because you're essentially running 2 back-to-back hundreds without needing to do a full warm-up and cool down, right? You warm up, run the 100-meter semis, you do a light kind of cool down situation, not really, but you're just kind of doing blocks, you're doing some starts, and then you go right into the final. You're keeping yourself up, you're ready to go. But between the heats and then the semifinals the next day, which is the current schedule, athletes like the ability to get 1 round out of the way, be able to really kind of, break off the cobwebs, get their legs moving, be able to execute, and then the next day circle back. So it's all right, all out, gun-ho, semis, final, we're going into it. So that is not going to be ideal, having a heat in the morning where you have to warm up, prepare, and then in the evening session, you got to go full throttle. Even though there's time between the morning session and the evening, it's not as much time as you may think, especially for, I'm thinking athletes' central nervous systems and different things like that. It's going to be a very big change for different athletes. Of course, in this case, the women's 100 meters. One thing I'm thinking about is it might favor younger athletes, especially because some of the younger athletes, and I'm thinking early to mid 20s or whatever it may be, they're probably more capable of not everyone needs a full warm up, but maybe not needing as much of a warm up or as much, preparation for any given race as a more experienced and older athlete who might be in their 30s, mid 30s, right? That's something that you're going to see. I'm thinking back to 2024. Shelly-Ann Fraser-Pryce, she unfortunately didn't compete in the semis at the Olympic Games. She pulled out. That was a very, controversial, situation and kind of crazy story because she didn't get the warm-up that was necessary because she was blocked from the gate. She had to walk all the way around. She took all that time was taken away from her as she was preparing for the semifinals. When she finally got to the warm-up track to be able to do her warm-up and prepare, she wasn't in it. She had lost all that time. She unfortunately had the mental kind of breakdown in situation that led to her pulling out of the semifinals. That is something to think about because you have an experienced athlete who obviously is a little bit older, but understands I can't hop on this track and perform to the best of my ability if my body is not fully warmed up, if I'm not in a place where I'm ready to actually execute. That's why I say younger athletes may feel more comfortable being able to, do their warm up, do their, what they need. And if it's not like fully, up to the standard that's, expected or has been expected in the past, then I think they may be able to adjust a little bit more. So there's that aspect. And of course, I just use Shelly as an example of someone who is an experienced and older athlete, but is well aware of the fact that if they're not ready and they're not warmed up, they're not going to be able to execute. So that's something to kind of really do think about. Also, I know some people may say, oh, the heats, it's just the heats. You can run the heats in the morning session and then come back for the semifinals. The heats are no big deal. We have to think about what we've been seeing in the past couple of years at the Olympic Games when it comes to the heats of the 100 meters. Just as an example, looking in 2024, the women's 100 meters, these women in the heats, these are preliminary rounds, but looking in the actual heats, round one, 10-9, 10-9, right? 10-9. We're looking at 10-9s and really fast, performances from all these women in the heats of the 100 meters. Not everyone is running 10-9s, obviously, but, 10-8s. So these are the times that we're seeing. This isn't, running 11-1, 11-2. Even if I go back to 2020, right, where you had, Elaine Thompson-Herah, legendary double-double. If we look at the opening rounds, you're talking about 10-8s. You're talking about, 10-7s, 10-8s. All these times are being run in the heats of the 100 meters. Then when you get to the semifinal, it's like, all right, this is it. Unless you're the best of the best, this is where you really got to go. And yes, I know you may say, all right, yes, your top athletes, Melissa and Julian and, Tina and Tia, like they're going to be able to run, those fast times and still manage themselves through the round. Of course, I agree as well. But then when you get to the fringe, in a sense, those athletes who are on the cusp of making a final, or like I said, those, athletes who are in their early to mid 30s who are still, kind of in contention, but might have a little or might need more time to be prepared and to run that fast consistently, that's where you may see some of them struggle, right? That's where you may see some of the athletes who are kind of like fringe in a sense, who are on the cusp of making a final. That's where you might see them struggle with 3 rounds in one day. So don't think that, okay, you can just run heats, semis, final real fast and heats are just nothing. These athletes are running 10-9s, 10-8s, 10-7s. I don't care what you say. That is very, very fast. That is very, very fast. So that's going to be something interesting to kind of like look at as we do look forward. The one thing I'll say to kind of end things off is that obviously this isn't ideal, and I gave all the reasons as to why it's not, but athletes are going to adjust. And it's not like, oh, you must adjust or else, but it's just the fact of the matter that we're still just under 3 years out, right, before the Olympic Games. They now know what's necessary in terms of execution through the rounds, what the schedule is going to look like, and athletes are going to prepare accordingly. They're going to make sure that they're going to get stronger. They're going to make sure that they're able to execute, 3 rounds in one day. They're going to go to preparation meets over the next few years where they're going to be running multiple rounds in a day to make sure their bodies are ready. So when they get to that point at the Olympics in Los Angeles 2028, they're able to execute to the best of their ability. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to run, what they might expect. Who knows? But I don't think we're going to see any type of drop off. This is still the Olympic Games at the end of the day. We had athletes in the past running 4 rounds of the 100, 200, 400 at Olympic Games, and they still saw you produce some of the fastest times in history, right? Last year, or I guess this year in 2025, many people were asking like, oh, the World Championships is at the very end of the year. This is going to burn athletes out. We're not going to see top time. We just saw one of the best World Championships in history with so many amazing performances literally at the end of September, right? So athletes, knowing what a schedule is like, knowing what is coming in front of them, they're going to adjust. Athletes, coaches, full teams, like they're going to adjust to the best of their ability to meet the needs of whatever schedule actually exists. So that's just my initial thoughts on the women's 100 meters. Again, not ideal, but we'll see how it actually does pan out. Let me know what you think about this change here with the women's 100 meters. Again, I'll probably do another video separately on the actual overall schedule. So yeah, let me know what you think. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. Truly appreciate y'all. Thanks for watching.